For me, very few images are as strong and sensory as the image of my mother in her garden. I can still feel the heat of the pea gravel under my bottom while I was searching for potato bugs. I can smell the thyme that grew in the paths that wound their way around the biomes of her garden kingdom. Throughout my life, in whatever weather, there was no question that my mother was most realized, most herself, and most powerful in her garden. And nothing soothed her, and by extension, nothing soothed the rest of us, like her twilight stroll, beer in hand, head bowed in deep satisfaction around her masterpiece. One of my guests today, Erica Reinheimer, wrote in the introduction to The Intelligent Gardener, "Gardening has been my calling. I like the listening part. I like sitting close to the plants in the morning, being with them, connecting. Understanding how minerals contribute to the garden has deepened that connection." Well, Erica and Alice Reinheimer, my guests today, left their lives in high tech to, in their words, grow excellent food, eat excellent food, help people grow excellent food, play music with friends, putter around the house, backpack, meditate somatically, watch movies, drink good wine, car camp, get real, and get cats. And if that doesn't make them sound like you want to be friends with them, I don't know what will. They created Grow Abundant Gardens, a website where gardeners, professional or personal, can get incredible insights, anecdotes, and other little nuggets from two exceptional gardeners, or even professional advice about how to interpret and actionize soil tests. So whatever you grow and however good you are at it, I guarantee Erica and Alice still have something to offer you. And I'm excited to share our conversation with you right after a word from Jesse and our sponsors.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to grow food, not spend my time creating pack lists, writing newsletters, responding to emails, or maintaining web stores. If I could spend less time on my phone and computer and more time farming, that would be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for CSA farmers. It takes care of the admin, managing orders, customer communications, and automating tedious tasks so you can get back to doing what you love. On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers 6 hours a week. That's 6 hours you could spend with your family, out in the field, or simply taking a breather. So, what would you do with an extra 6 hours? Now's the time to get your systems ready for next season. Learn how Farmhand can help at farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, enjoy the show.
Erica and Alice, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being on with me today.
Thank you, Mimi.
Hey, Mimi. It's great being here.
Well, we appreciate your contributions. I was telling you before we pressed record that your contributions on our grower forum have been some of the most visited and appreciated, especially amongst the hosts. I think when we have a regular contributor who can offer personal anecdotes and insights, yours are always very thoughtful, and it's been really wonderful to have you be such a presence on there. And it seemed like time to just have a conversation in front of the microphone. So let's get into it. Alice, why don't we start with you? Can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you've come to be working in growing abundant food and just the efforts that you're doing now at this point in your life, and what brought you here?
Sure. Yeah. I think I had my first garden when I was 10. You know, I'm of an era where, my parents and their friends and kind of everyone around had a garden, you know, so get some fresh produce in the summer. So, fast forwarding many, many years then, it was really Erica who got into the mineralization of our gardens. I mean, we had been gardening together for pretty much our entire time together, except when we were traveling and things like that, and couldn't do that. But we'd really tried to kind of arrange our lives to have a garden every place that we lived. and, with varying amounts of success, actually. But Erica had been doing some research, once we got here to California. We're gardening on kind of the side of a old sand dune. And even though the climate is just absolutely wonderful and it's kind of the avocado belt, our garden wasn't doing great. I managed to grow corn that was about a foot tall when we first moved here. But Erica had done this research and she'd really gotten into, understanding the minerals and she'd gotten like some advice from Michael Estera and things like that, and tried it on the garden, and it was just wonderful. Things started really taking off and doing well, and that was pretty transformative. And so I have a high-tech background. I actually have a degree in physics and had worked in high-tech for like 25 years. And so I said to myself, well, I can program this to be able to make the calculations a little bit easier and make them so that there aren't math errors and you don't forget things and that sort of thing. So I'm the programmer behind Organic Calc and I do the website and things like that. So kind of like the tech support, as it were, and just at the same time, I'm getting the benefit of eating really great food.
Indeed. And Erica, is your background in soil chemistry, soil biology? What was your path?
Well, the path really got going when we decided we wanted to have a homestead and raise goats and chickens and have a garden. We wanted to do that full time. So we bought I guess a 16-acre plot in West Virginia, had some bottom land in it. This was like in 76 or 78, something like that. And so we were really enmeshed in, the homestead lifestyle. We did that for about 5 years or so. And, we were compost gardeners. We weren't we read all the Rodale publications and, we had some good success there. I don't think it was really astounding, but so then, I went back to school and I got a job in high tech too. The research and development was applicable to this. I worked in R&D for 3 years. And then this was for a flat panel company in the 80s. And then I went into applications engineering. And so that was good sort of business background. But all this time, we're growing better and better gardens all the time. And we've had good gardens every year, honestly, but they really did take off when we began to understand the mineralization.
That's where I think your particular wheelhouse is going to be. Our audience is a bunch of growers and there is a wealth of knowledge and experience out there, but I always find it incredibly valuable to go back to some of these kind of primary principles. And I think I hear a lot, we use a lot of compost and things like that. And, even I fall victim to this where you just think, just turning my beds and putting a bunch of compost down or mulching in the cover crop or, whatever you're doing. And I remember very vividly, I think it was maybe 2016 or something, but I was at a conference and there was a remineralization workshop. And it really got me thinking. Most of us would love to believe that just a good compost will get you all the way there. And then you have an experience where you try something that, to your point, is more specific and more tailored to the deficiencies that are native to your area. And you can sometimes see something very extraordinary. So why don't we get into why compost isn't quite enough? And either of you can speak, or both of you could speak to this, I'm sure, for a while.
Well, it's almost a philosophy thing. I mean, I think compost is enough for some people, if they're satisfied with the results. My experience here was after we did the minerals, I said, oh, it's really, now we're ready. We can pour on the compost and we'll really get going. So we imported something like 8 tons of pretty good stuff. It was from a mushroom farm and it wasn't used. It was front end stuff. And, we applied that. We grew some really excellent vegetables, with that combination. But it didn't do what I thought it was going to do. I thought it was going to build organic matter. And it really didn't. I mean, not long term. I mean, it would sort of jump up, but I call that phenomenon the compost treadmill, where you're always applying more. And it's a lot of work.
And a lot of money.
It's a lot of work. But like I said, I got some really good results doing that. I don't do it so much anymore. My soil, and then it wasn't very good here. It was a loamy sand with a CEC of 3. And so that's pretty poor. You're in a lot better shape if you're gardening or growing on alluvial soil, but we're not. We don't have agricultural soil, not really. And part of the reason for that is the cost of buying agricultural soil anywhere. But it's often not for sale because it's productive, And anyway, why isn't compost enough? Well, what we're doing now is we're using biochar for the carbon because that has some of the same characteristics of humus, like being able to hold water and hold nutrients, not to the same extent. But it's permanent. When we put it, it's going to be there. So I'm worried less about importing massive amounts of compost now because I think that investment in the biochar is going to take care of it. And I think we're going to get to more of what a lot of people want to see as sort of a steady state situation where, just the residue from the garden and the residue from the kitchen is enough to keep the biology spinning.
Mm-hmm. The retention. And that is a thing that I think doesn't get a lot of attention.
There's one more thing about compost, though, before we get off the compost subject, and that we've seen a lot of soil tests, and you can pretty much tell when someone's been using a lot of animal-based manure compost because they'll be high in phosphorus and high in potassium, and those the more you add, kind of the more it builds up and builds up and builds up until it's an excess, and that's an issue,
not just for the crop, but for leaching and all kinds of reasons.
You can't add more, right?
Yeah,
so you really shouldn't. And so what are you going to do for feeding your biology and providing carbon, right? So that it's a little is good. There's a whole balancing act that goes on here, and getting the right balance so that you can continue to add, like your composted scraps or from your farm, whatever the animals are producing is good. So don't put it all on at once.
Well, I think that's a really good point, Alice. That animal manure compost is a fertilizer as well as an amendment. And it is possible to throw things out of balance. If you have too much potassium, you're going to impact the uptake of magnesium and nitrogen. And so, and so I don't think there's anything wrong with applying vegetative compost as much as you want. I think that's always a good thing. How much do you need? I don't know. If you can do at least a 1/4 inch per year, that's going to help a lot. If you can do more, good. but it needs to be high quality too, or it needs to be applied as a mulch.
And it is getting harder and harder, I think, to navigate some of the issues with off-farm production of compost and how to find high-quality compost that doesn't come with issues or toxicity problems. There have been some horror stories on our forum and in our little circles that I've heard. And I think, to your point, Alice, it's a really good one about the ways that compost from animals, which, what a great idea. Use this waste product. And however, one thing that I have observed with especially high potassium, ever higher potassium, is that it dramatically affects the quality of the vegetable production or fruit production. I mean, it just completely changes the character of what's getting prioritized in terms of the development of the particular fruit or vegetable. So I think that's a very good point that you make as well. Instead of doing targeted applications, you're really kind of getting whatever's there.
Right. And, you'll get a lot of sodium with it too, right? If you think about those salt licks that the cows all have, it just goes right through.
Yeah. So let's talk about Grow Abundant. It's a website. And then on that website, there are options to interact with your application called Organic Calc. So could you walk through what that is and what it offers to growers? And I know there's a commercial version, and then there's kind of a, kind of a home-based grower kind of a version of it. So can you speak to how you developed that and what it offers to people that I think is actually pretty amazing, especially how simple it is, given, the way that we interact with soil reports right now, or even tissue reports, can be completely overwhelming for people who don't have an extensive background. So I would love for you to walk through what you were trying to offer people there.
So what Organic Calc does, if you get a soil test, if say you get a soil test from Logan Labs, what you get back is a sheet, 8.5 by 11 PDF of numbers, right? And some labs that you get it back from, they'll have comments like high or low, or they'll have asked you what your crop is, and they'll give you like tons per acre of lime that you need, or some recommendations for amendments. So, and we've gotten those before, and I've gotten them, and I said, oh, wow, I wonder what this means. So the question is like getting from the soil test to actually getting to like a recipe of amendments that's gonna balance the minerals in your soil is what Organic Calc does. So it's based on a Logan Labs soil test, either their M3 or AA.2 or AA tests, which are the kind of their standard tests. And the reason that it's all based on Logan Labs is that for those kind of tests, if you get them from another lab, they do somewhat different processes. It's not like a standardized process, so you can't really mix and match those. So anyway, what you do then is you get Logan Labs soil test, and you copy the numbers from the sheet that came into an online form, which is Organic Calc. And Organic Calc then goes ahead and calculates exactly what you need. You put in your area, you put in whether you're no-till or not, the depth, if you're going to till, the depth that you're going to till into. And it basically tries to balance the soil for all the minerals, including the micros, and just gives you a recipe, for exactly that area. And you take that and you go get your amendments with it. What the pro version does is it allows you to change some of the amendments. So for example, boron, we, for the kind of the home gardener one, we use borax as a boron amendment. For the grower, you might go to the feeds or go to the farm store and get Solubor or something like that. So you can change the amount of boron in there and change that amendment. And you can also change up like the compost as well, and put in, kind of customize the NPK with carbon amendments that you're going to put in there. And it, trying to think, was there anything else that it does? It makes you a cup of coffee. I don't know. No, it doesn't.
That's a good summary. I mean, it's just a calculator. So what we wanted to do was to take the targets that all the farmers, all the commercial farmers, our agronomists know about, and make them accessible to, to small farms and to gardeners. We didn't make the stuff up.
No.
We did a lot of research to find out what these targets are, and the rest of it's just a calculator.
Right.
Right.
But it's a wonderful bridge, I think, between what often becomes an insurmountable chasm for people to traverse when they get a report and they think, well, what am I going to do with this information now? Or what is it even telling me? Especially if you're testing year in and year out, I think it's such a valuable tool just to be able to make sense of what you're looking at every year. And along those lines, I wonder if you could speak to the minimums that different labs use for the different crop types. Have you found those to be pretty reliable, or do you sometimes use a different level at all for your calculator?
Different labs? Yeah, we did a lab comparison. It's kind of expensive. What we did is we sent the same samples to different labs when we first started this. And then we would also repeat the samples, the same sample to the same lab. So from that, I don't know, $800 worth of testing or so, we had a pretty good idea what the error bars are for the individual labs, and also how they differ between the three labs that we chose. And we decided, people who come to us with a report from another lab, we say, yeah, you can use that information, but the best thing to do is just get a report from Logan and then compare that to the report from the other lab. Because we really like Logan because they're low cost. And, most of our customers are pretty sensitive in that area. So, and, to that point, Organic Health is pretty, you can do as many analyses as you want in a year, and it doesn't cost you any more. So it kind of opens the door to, more extensive testing for low-cost operations.
Which I think is a really important point. It is even if you're not running multiple analyses, it is a very reasonable cost for what you get out of it, I think. And I would like to kind of double click on that a little bit, because I feel like one of the reasons people are hesitant to go beyond whatever they're doing with compost applications is that they assume that it's going to be more expensive to address individual nutrients. What's your experience with that, and what would you say to that assumption?
Well, there's one thing that comes to mind immediately, and that is that, when you know where you're going, when you know exactly what you need to balance it, then you're not going to be wasting anything, right? You're not going to be putting on something you don't need. So that's really part of it. And then I guess another thing you can do is kind of triage what you're going to put on. Like, for example, if your NPK is way out of whack, then you really probably ought to address that first, right? And get those, it'll really kind of highlight like what's the biggest problem that I have right to start with that I should address. And then you can, maybe ignore zinc for a few years or something like that,
The main
some
limiting
of the smaller,
factor.
microbes that the idea is to find the low hanging fruit and take care of that first.
We have a lot of customers who just do everything at once, because
Yeah.
in a small area, it's really not that expensive. So, there's a lot wrong with the commercial food system in America, as you can, the medical statistics show. People who are growing their own food are already doing most of the work. And, this is just going to make it that much healthier without that much more work or expense.
Yeah. And it's so empowering, I think, just to feel like you have some agency in terms of the quality of the food that you're going to be feeding your family. And having access to such a great tool makes it that much easier. And I also think that it's important to remember that we're managing this ecosystem that, for structural reasons, for biological reasons, needs assistance sometimes. And, a lot of these systems have been changed for more than 100 years.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Ohio Earth Food. If you grow plants, you know that to a farm of any size, your soil is your most steadfast partner, an asset worthy of investing in. Since 1972, Ohio Earth Food has been the go-to source for the highest performing and most cost-effective granular and liquid fertilizers, seed starting soils, foliar sprays, and disease and insect controls, all approved for use on organic farms. They deliver them right to your farm too. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in their Plant Pro and the Seed Catapult potting soils, and put their ReVita fertilizers in your soil before you plant, and rest assured that your plants will have all the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. These natural blends utilize compost, kelp, and humate, and are low salt index safe for high tunnels. Feed your soils and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com, now with branches in Ohio and Wisconsin. ohioearthfood.com. All right, back to the show.
So would you speak a little bit to how the remineralization process can help address structural issues and how it can help with biology as well? Because I wonder sometimes if people are reaching for compost first because they think it's the most benign, most biological, and that may be a little bit of a false promise sometimes, I think.
I'm a big fan of compost.
I love compost. Also a huge fan.
I'm up to my elbows in it. I make it. I spread it. I do all that. So, I would not abandon that practice. The advantages to the mineralization is that it's a lot less work. It's a lot less expensive. And once you get it right, most of those minerals are going to stick around. And the microbes need those minerals too, and the plants need those minerals. And your food's going to be a lot better if it has that, the plants have access to those minerals. It tastes better. It keeps better. It yields better, actually. So it's kind of a win-win, the combination of the minerals and the microbes.
Right. Microbodies are include all of those minerals. If you think about it, even if you think about rhizophagy, right? They've got the little microbes need to go out and find the mineral and incorporate it into their body before the plant eats them, right? And but there, you mentioned structural also, and there are a couple of minerals that really affect that. And one is if for clay soils in particular, right? So we live in an area that it's really high in magnesium. So they have a thing called Diablo clay, which is just this really tight, high magnesium clay. So the addition of calcium, usually in the form of gypsum around here because the pH is high, the calcium can work its way in between the little clay platelets, and it kind of pops them apart just because of the size of the calcium ion. And so it can flocculate the soil, it can bring air into it and loosen up those tight soils. And then, conversely, magnesium, when it gets in between the little platelets, it tightens things up. So if you have a loose soil, then maybe not sand. It's not gonna tighten up sand, right? But if you have something that has some clay in it that you wish was tighter, then magnesium can help. But it usually goes the other way, that that you need calcium to help loosen it.
I've seen that a lot in California, that just the clays that seize up and they start cracking around the roots, and it can cause all kinds of issues. And yeah, I really appreciate that structural component when it comes, because you're kind of setting up a system, right? I mean, you want the system to be balanced so that it can run efficiently and feed everyone what they need, and then they'll in turn feed the plants. So one of the things that I love about your website and your reflections, I really enjoy reading the posts that you guys do. And I really appreciate how respectfully you talk about what it means to grow your own food, and how empowering that is, and how it is becoming kind of a lost, I mean, not completely, there's a resurgence of that at the same time, but this massive food system is sort of set up against people really being empowered to grow their own food. And I love how you've provided so many resources for people, whether it's reading through the different amendments that they can look at to address some of their issues, or whether it's just talking about harvesting onions or whatever it is. When you are writing for your website, for your posts, and when you're contributing, what are you hoping? I mean, what do you really hope for, say, your granddaughter's future? And how do you feel about what you're doing and how that's contributing to that?
Well, you hit it on the head. Our granddaughter, she's worked on like CSA farms, and she knows how to grow food. She's, and our son as well, right? He's managed a farmer's market in Durango, Colorado, and headed up their local co-op. So that whole aspect of the food system, fortunately, is being passed on through our family, and we're really, really proud of that. Because that I just feel like so much of our health really comes from our food, right? I mean, and when you're connected to the earth, when you're connected to that whole cycle, then it kind of makes you more of a whole human being. And I wish that for everyone. I really do. If I could go out and encourage people to, at least get it like a community garden plot or whatever you can do, or put a couple of pots of tomatoes out, on your patio and grow them. It's so much the better. And people are so excited when they do that. I mean, I've had people who literally just have like a pot of tomatoes on their patio, and they're so proud of what they have managed to grow, and it's like, oh, I'm going to carve it into and serve it ceremoniously to my friends. So it's it's what we are as humans, right? To have that kind of connection and connection with each other through food. So, do I think that we're going to change the world starting here? Well, we're going to hopefully provide a seed for the next generation and leave something better, leave something for them, at least pass on the knowledge, that we've managed to accumulate. So that's my soapbox.
I feel that a lot when I read your posts, because they're just very supportive and not judgmental or condescending at all. They're just very straightforward, always helpful, always thoughtful, but just very supportive. And I like to think that that's the kind of community that we cultivate as gardeners and farmers, that we understand that we're all learning all the time, and our plants are teaching us and our soils are teaching us. And what really comes through with the two of you, I feel, is this spirit of wonder that I hope maybe is the best we can hand off to our children and our grandchildren is just that sense of wonder at being surrounded by what wants to be abundant and being able to be a part of that process. And I just really appreciate how you contribute to that space. And I want more people to engage with you.
Part of my practice, as it were, centers around plant communication, but I should maybe call it plant listening. I don't know. I just love, just being there, and I think that actually that, not so tangible energy is one of the reasons why homegrown tastes so good. It's because, we love the plants and they love us back.
Totally. And what you said earlier, Alice, about the fire escape tomatoes, I can't tell you how many friends that, during COVID that I have in big cities started growing a little bit of food just out on their patios or out on their fire escapes or whatever. And that was such a gift, I think, for people, because you become so protective of that food that you grew, It's sort of like the special wine area of my wine cellar, where there's a place in front where if my husband's going to grab something, it's the stuff that I keep well stocked, but the good stuff is in the back. And people became that way about their own tomatoes. That, we'll have the store-bought tonight because the stuff we grew is for Saturday night.
Right, exactly.
So I love that. I love that philosophy. Well, I'd love it if you, because you mentioned it earlier, and I haven't seen anything that you've written about it, but you're using biochar now, and we get asked about biochar all the time. I just did an interview with Kelpie Wilson, who wrote the Biochar Handbook. She's great. How are you using it? What have you observed? How do you, because there's that interaction with minerals and keeping them retained too. So what have you experienced anecdotally using biochar in your system or with clients or whatever?
Well, we tried it early on. We obtained, 30 gallon bag. And we tried to charge it 3 different ways. And, we set up 3 trial plots, and I was not impressed. We didn't really see any difference for about 3 years. And then what had been a really pretty mediocre part of a bed suddenly was our best bed. So it was obvious that this was worth pursuing. And from there, we'd been making it, and we still make biochar. And but for what we needed to do with our pretty terrible sandy soil, it was going to take years and years. So we purchased some, and we did a better job charging it this time around. Like, the first thing we did was hydrate it. We put it in a horse trough. It was already ground up and everything, but the pH of that stuff as it comes out, it's very alkaline. There isn't any microbe that's really going to like that all that much, pH 9 or 10. And it's dry, So we put it in a horse trough. I don't know, a couple 100 gallons, I guess, pretty big one. And after a while, it'll sink. And, we would stir it with a canoe paddle. And at the same time, we were adding a little bit of citric acid and testing the result. And it was interesting because on the test strips, the liquid would show a reasonable pH, but the little spots where the biochar hit the test strip would still be alkaline. So even though the solution was, reasonable in the 6s or 7s, it hadn't penetrated the biochar, and you could kind of tell that. So we kept it in there and kept adding small amounts of citric acid took quite a bit until it stabilized. And at that point, we threw all kinds of biology at it. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we put in, molasses, EM1, alfalfa pellets, crab meal. I can't remember what all. Finished compost. Yeah, well, we did all this stuff.
What a slurry.
The crab shells, they smelled for a while, but then they settled down. And after that, we put it in a compost pile for about 6 months. And this was not a super, orchestrated experiment or anything, but it seemed to work better than the 3 years that it took before.
Well, that tracks with my experience as well. I think depending on the source and what it was, what the feedstock was, the hydration alone is a major factor in how effective it is and how long. I mean, because it's been effective in every trial that I've done, but to your point, especially if you're in a low rainfall area, there was no question that we were retaining more water, but it wasn't necessarily available to my plants. And I was wondering what was going on. And I think that was it. I mean, it takes a while for it to become hydrated. And it's such a fascinating amendment to work with for so many reasons. But I love how I love your trough experiment. And I do think that where fire has been kept out of systems, it is a really interesting and important way to sort of rebuild that carbon layer in our soils, which is challenging.
It sure is. I mean, Rattan Lal, the researcher at Ohio State, knows a lot about carbon sequestration. He more or less said that unless you have something like 3.6% organic matter, you're not going to be able to sequester carbon.
Yeah, you're on a treadmill.
I interpreted it to mean that, it takes life to build life.
Yeah.
And my experiment, with the, 8 tons of compost on 2,000 square feet, it didn't build it anywhere near 3.6%. But the biochar does. Now, no, it's not labile carbon like you'd really like to have. But I think it maybe sets up the system so that it can sequester the compost applications better.
I think of it more as the interest building account, where you can really start banking as opposed to your cash account. Because we just turn that over so quickly. It's true. And some places faster than we can grow it, for sure. So I do think that if we can reestablish that interest-bearing account, then you can maybe get off that treadmill a little faster, depending on what you're growing and how intensive it is. But that's a really good point. And I'm glad you're always being experimental, because that's very exciting. So can you speak to anything that you're really excited about right now? What are you trying? Are you growing anything new? Are you traveling anywhere new? What's on the horizon for you both?
Well, I just finished going through a nitrogen management for organic systems seminar I think it's the 4th time I've been through it.
Never gets old.
so nitrogen management it's not easy in an organic system. The other minerals are pretty easy. Like once you put them in, they'll stay there, with the exception of the anions, which are nitrogen, boron, sulfur, and molybdenum, those 4. So if I don't have a soil test, I just get 1 a year, in the spring. And I'll maybe have 3 crops, in the same bed. In between, I'm looking at adding those 4 because they will leach, unlike the ones that are more stable. So I've been giving molybdenum a short shift. I had a pretty low target on them, 1 part per million. the agronomist at Logan Labs says 2 to 3, and I'm going to bump it up to 2 based on the results. Well, I'm going to finish the trials here first, but I had super good results on one bed by adding molybdenum along with the boron, the sulfur, and the nitrogen. And it totally makes sense too, because molybdenum is necessary for the nitrogen fixing microbes to fix nitrogen. And it's involved in I guess it's called nitrogen reductase, the way that the nitrate gets to amino acids inside the plant. So nitrogen, amino acids, nitrogen is protein basically once it gets into the plant. And, that's super important, So yeah, I'm looking at applying molybdenum more recently based on my tests here. And I'd really like to help people do better job of nitrogen management. I think it's one of the things that Organic Health doesn't, we have a link to a long discussion about nitrogen because it's a complex subject. But we also have tracking data, and hardly anybody goes there. So I think that is, it's not easy. Unlike the rest of the stuff, is pretty easy. Mm-hmm. Nitrogen isn't, and it so isn't. I'm pretty interested in learning more and communicating more about how to do that effectively.
It is one of the areas that I find particularly interesting are those cofactors for nitrogen to be effective. And also, those micronutrients that are easy to blow off. I mean, I've been as guilty as anyone of being like, molybdenum, really? Like, how important can it really be? But it's true. And the more we learn about these things, and I find it also fascinating, the better the results. And when you can share those results with people, I think it becomes that much more impactful.
Well, the way these minerals work, the gestalt is much more than the individuals. Mm-hmm. When you get the whole thing humming and working together and balanced, it's a lot more than just adding one of them.
True. Quadratic effects. How about you, Alice? What are you excited about right now?
Well, one of the things that we do that Organic Health doesn't do that we do by hand is we do an analysis of the saturated paste test alongside the soil test. So the saturated paste, basically, they take the soil and they mix it with water, hopefully your irrigation water, into a slurry, like a kind of a pancake batter thing. And they leave it for 24 hours and then vacuum out the water and test what has solubilized in the water. So as Erica likes to say, the minerals are in there what the plant is drinking. And so if you hire us to do an analysis, we will do a paste analysis, but Organic Health doesn't do it automatically. We've been doing this for long enough that Organic Health should do it automatically. So that's it. Does it excite me to go and do more programming? You bet.
That's right.
But I think when it's done, it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a big step forward. Just don't ask me like when it's going to be done.
I won't ask when, but that's very exciting. And I'm impressed that you are keeping those programming instruments sharp, because that seems like something you have to be very on top of maybe if it's your wheelhouse, it's not as intimidating as it sounds to me, but it doesn't sound very straightforward, and everything's changing all the time. So I won't ask when, but I'm glad you're working on it.
Great. Thanks.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and you've been very gracious with your time so far. Is there anything that you wish that I had asked that I didn't? Or anything you want to share that I haven't prompted you for?
I would shout out to your listeners. I'm, hi out there. I'm so glad that you're doing this. So thank you very much.
I would just repeat that, for people who are growing good food already, bringing the minerals into the mix it's low-hanging fruit compared to everything else that goes into growing really good food.
Agreed. It's a great reminder, and we all need to be refreshed. We get farther and farther away from the first things that we learned that we got so excited about, and I think we convince ourselves that our system is working, and we forget about those things that we're just leaving on the table. And so it's great to be reminded of that. And I would like to personally thank you both for everything that you're contributing to the community and also just in your own family. It's the greatest gift. What you're sharing with your son and with your granddaughter, it's the greatest gift. That sense of wonder and just the nourishment that comes from growing food and being empowered to know how to do that. They can't take that away from you. So thank you for everything that you're doing. And I wish you both the very best with all the things that you're working on. And I hope we can check back in and find out how some of those trials worked out.
Great. Thank you, Mimi.
Thank you, Mimi.
So you are definitely going to want to check out Grow Abundant and Organicalc. Those are outstanding resources for any gardener, and I highly recommend The Intelligent Gardener, the book that Erica co-authored with Steve Solomon. I'll mention again that if you participate in the No-Till Growers Forum, some of the best contributions are made by Erica and Alice, and we love having them in that community. They inspire confidence and calm with their rational and almost spiritual approach to their love of growing, and it really shows. I'm reminded of those allegorical wise women who quietly healed, fed, and delivered the nations of early humans in so many cultures around the world. And on those lines, we're going to go out with The Seven of Pentacles by Marge Piercy. Under a sky the color of pea soup, she's looking at her work growing away there, actively, thickly like grapevines or pole beans, as things grow in the real world, slowly enough. If you tend them properly, if you mulch, if you water, if you provide birds that eat insects a home for winter food, if the sun shines and you pick off caterpillars, if the praying mantis comes and the ladybugs and the bees, then the plants flourish, but at their own internal clock. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. You cannot always tell by looking what is happening. More than half the tree is spread out under the soil, under your feet. Penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree. Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden. Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar. Weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses. Live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving. Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in. A thicket and bramble, wilderness to the outside, but to us, interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and layers. Live as if you liked yourself, and it may happen. Reach out, keep reaching out, keep bringing in. This is how we are going to live for a long time. Not always, for every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. Always make sure to check the links in the show notes for how to follow our guests and hosts. The No-Till Market Garden podcast is a free show that is supported by folks like you who contribute every month over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. That support helps ensure all the shows we do, from the Seed Farmer podcast to the Winter Growers podcast, the Collaborative Farming podcast, the Composter podcast, Growers Daily, and of course, the No-Till Market Garden podcast, can continue to go and grow. You can also find books and hats as well as an active forum over at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge thank you to editor Michael Sellis and producer Jackson Roulette for all their work on this show and the rest of the team over at no-tillgrowers.com. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and make sure you are subscribed wherever you're hearing this so you don't miss the next episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. See you then.